Okay, now to dive into the learning session. Please first give a virtual round of applause to our speakers, Josh and Tamara from Frolic and Andrew and Jeff from SquareOne Villages. Thank you all for carving times in. I know in your extremely busy schedules that you guys are going around lots of different places to just graciously share your experience you have as a developer for housing co-ops. We'll do a round of introductions. This will most likely take between 5 to 10 minutes. So as you introduce yourself, please share your background on your company and experience, as well as your journey on how you got started on your first co-op development project. Jeff, would it be cool if I have you start us off?
Yeah, sure. My name is Jeff Albanese, and I'm the program director for SquareOne Villages. We're located in Eugene, Oregon, and have been developing cooperatives and kind of combining it with elements of a community land trust. And yeah, I think that's it.
I can provide, I guess, a bit more background as to how we came into the cooperative model, if that's what you're looking for. So yeah, I didn't have any slides prepared, but if you guys want to go to squareonevillages.org, you can see kind of the visuals of the projects I'll mention here. We really kind of came into the cooperative housing model really from a bottom-up type approach. We formed as a nonprofit back in 2012 as a grassroots all-volunteer organization, specifically to provide alternative solutions for folks that are unsheltered. So we started with our Opportunity Village project, which is just very simple, tiny homes designed to be a step up from a tent encampment. And we found that in many of these encampments that there was some organizational structure and democratic organization, and we tried to recreate that in our Opportunity Village project, using elements of self-management. And so that was kind of our first project. And we quickly learned that there wasn't a whole lot of places for folks to transition to, unless you're one of the lucky few to receive a Section 8 voucher. And so from there, we kind of tried to replicate that kind of self-governed tiny house village model in a more permanent housing setting. So our next two projects, Emerald Village and Cottage Village, were based on a similar tiny house village concept, but permanent houses built to standard building code and permitted as permanent residences. And I think a housing cooperative was just kind of a natural transition from that, what we were doing at Opportunity Village, where there was a village council and there was committees, and they were kind of working together to manage their own shelter. And the cooperative model was really just a way to formalize that within existing real estate law for a permanent housing project. I had also been living in a housing cooperative at the time, the Walnut Street Co-op, which was one of only maybe a handful of co-ops in Oregon at the time. So I guess that played into it as well. So we did those first two projects, which were both leasehold co-ops, where SquareOne retains ownership of both the land and the physical assets and leases them to a cooperative. And from there, we've really been trying to transition more to a limited equity cooperative model, where the residents own the housing and we retain ownership of the land using kind of a community land trust, limited equity cooperative hybrid ownership structure, which we found to be, very interesting and seem to address many of the root causes of the housing problem, in our opinion. So we've done a couple projects based on that model. The first being C Street Co-op, which was just a pretty small infill project, duplex and a fourplex on a single family lot, designed to kind of be a pilot project for the upzoning that has recently been approved throughout Oregon. So that was our first time doing a project where it's a 6-member co-op and they collectively own both of those buildings. And I suppose we can talk about maybe more details of financing and such later. So I'll just keep it brief. But from there, we're currently working on our 4th co-op, which is currently under construction, Peace Village Co-op, which is kind of designed to try to bring that model to scale. It's a 70-unit project. So it's a similar size project and a similar target population that is commonly, a low-income housing tax credit type project. And we're trying to demonstrate, how we can alternatively use the cooperative model to provide permanently affordable, stable housing to that population as kind of an alternative to that LIHTC model. And we should be done with that project in December. So it's been a big learning curve for us in terms of applying the cooperative model at a much larger scale in terms of a 70 unit co-op and the differences in management structures and things like that.
Thank you, Andrew, for such a great introduction. And Josh and Tamara, if you guys want to share a little bit about yourself as well.
I was trying to find the applause emoji thing. It was great. So exciting to hear more about what you all have been working on, Andrew and Josh. Do you want to start us off?
You found the emoji.
Yeah.
Well, my name is Tamara. I started Frolic with Josh about 5 years ago, and it was kind of born out of research that we're doing at MIT, looking at community-driven development models and alternative financing models that can, I guess, both be just allow the people that exist in neighborhoods to continue to be able to live there, and recognizing all the zoning changes that are occurring and all the population changes that are happening, and really being drawn to a co-op model because of the ability to just lower the threshold of owning a home and what owning a home can mean. And I mean, everyone in this room, I think, understands all of that. I'll let Josh hop in.
I'm thinking to do an accelerated version of our of a kind of an overview of what we're up to. But without talking fast is my challenge. So do my best. And then butt in Tamara as you.
Yeah, and I'll say that also just for everyone, Jenny, it's up to you, but if it works, people are welcome to kind of ask questions, and we're welcome to kind of turn this into a dialogue. Maybe Jeff and Andrew, you can help us see where parallels are within the work that you're doing.
Really down for that.
Can I just
Cool.
do one thing?
Yeah.
Nice to make all your faces a little bit larger.
Yeah, that's nice.
Okay.
Well, Tamara shared kind of the gist of our inception and why, feeling that lack of access to home ownership and housing security. We started in Seattle in 2019. And then the upzone, similar to in Oregon, a lot of single family lots in Seattle have been upzoned, and that's been concentrated in areas in Seattle that were historically redlined. So a lot of people that are facing displacement because of the upzone are kind of haven't had so many options if they sell their property. So we've been partnering with homeowners that are have lots that have higher development potential.
So I'd say that also, just because a lot of you are based in California, so Prop 13 protects the property taxes from increasing in land, but the question of, or just the reality of then people who then own homes in the present tense end up paying extraordinarily higher property taxes than people that used to be on the property. So I think it's a different challenge, but it shares a lot of parallels.
And so the two things we're doing, one is the cooperative structure. We can talk more about that. The other is that building co-ops in markets like Seattle or land is so expensive is really tough. And the way we've been able to do that is by working with homeowners that want to be a part of the future project. And so our homeowners, have anywhere from $200,000 to $600,000 in equity that's in their home. And we are adding impact investment to that equity and then going and getting a construction loan. So those two kind of pieces are the driving force of the project, and it's helping us build projects with less additional cash. like $300,000 to $400,000 per project. And then what we're building are 6 to 10 unit co-ops on previously single family lots. Here's an example of one of them, an example of another, which is like 7 units with a common house, ground floor circulation, or like a lot of people walking kind of to and from their homes with porches and stoops, and we're really trying to create some of the qualities of, you know, what allowing people to get to know each other on a daily basis, which I feel like SquareOne is doing really is like clear in your projects as well. That sort of intentionality, and then a common house where everyone can eat together if they want to. Set up like a shared cooking system and a guest suite so that people who live in smaller units can use the guest room when they have visitors. And then the ownership structure we're using, our version of a co-op is basically a variation in some ways of a limited equity co-op where the resident shares are adding up to about half of the capital stack, what people are purchasing, and we're able to offer mortgages for those. We have a partnership with a credit union in Seattle that's providing those share loans. And then the co-op debt is coming from a blanket mortgage and then impact capital that's making up a portion of that debt. So we can kind of get more into that side of the projects, but the main reason, one of the main things that we love about the model is about co-ops is that the down payments are, you know, between $10,000 and $30,000 in our projects right now, and that's opening up homeownership to people who have been historically left out.
So I'd maybe just add there that part of what we've designed is a capital stack and understanding how the finances work for a co-op. And then the other piece of it is creating, I mean, everyone in this room, everyone's thinking about co-ops and how to build co-ops. Financing is just one of the hardest pieces. And so a huge part of our process in designing the model was working very closely with banks. National Co-op Bank has been a great partner for us, and understanding the different loan products and how they can fit into those systems. So Josh was mentioning Verdi Credit Union, that's a local credit union, but National Co-op Bank is also providing share mortgages for other projects that we do. And yeah, then working with also then the blanket mortgage lenders as well. Right now, being more connected to specialty lenders that are very familiar with co-ops.
Yeah, we can touch more on that if y'all are curious. Then just to so the way that we've structured them is really trying to balance equity growth with long-term affordability. And these are not, there's no ground lease, so the co-ops own the land and the building. Once they're built, they're autonomous entities owned by the residents. And that has a lot of trade-offs. There's limits to the kind of control we have as a steward. But our stewardship role is kind of helping the co-op set its budgets and manage its asset over time. And the loan document, we can get into kind of the ways that we're enforcing long-term affordability, but we really have also tried to emphasize allowing residents to gain wealth through their resident shares as they grow, but maintaining keeping the project accessible over time to people that are middle and low income.
And maybe just kind of sharing a snapshot of where we are as a company. So we've been tailoring the model so far to Washington state law, but we just received a grant from the Trans-Zuckerberg Initiative to expand to California. And with that money, we're adapting the model to California law, and then hopefully we'll move to Oregon. And
part of just to like share part of our hope, which is this group is such a good representation of, is that we see the way to kind of have a larger impact is to create this bigger ecosystem of people creating co-ops, and that they can look and feel a lot of different ways and express themselves in so many different ways. And we see our role as not just building projects, but then also helping other people other organizations do the same in other locations. So that's kind of our hope and vision.
So part of it is, oh, go. Jenny?
I thought that was a great leadway to go to that first prompt question, because I think some of the things you're going to be discussing is probably like for roles and responsibilities. So I was wondering if we can transition to that, if that's possible. Because there's also another question related to financing. So I know, Josh, you've been like, if we want to dive into it, and I think the group really wants to dive into it. So would that be a cool way to transition?
Totally.
Okay, cool. So the first question, I think just taking a step back, was like just understanding just like the different players that you're working with to get this development off the ground. So the first question is like, I think the group wanted to like understand a little bit more in detail, is like, in your experience, like who are the different partners and the key characteristics that they have to make a housing co-op development project successful? Because I know there's a lot of different players involved in it, and just wondering like, who are the key ones that you've been noticing coming up regularly, and what makes it helpful to be working with them?
It's interesting. There's kind of in my head, there's two frameworks to it. One is all of the systems that are there that are almost needed in order to do a development project. So you need to be able to get permitting, get the financing, bring in equity investment as well. So like conventional lending, equity investment. And then there's just the reality of what are you actually building? So yeah, there's all the professionals that are required and need to be thoughtful and able to use their systems for the project. And then the people who are actually building projects. And so we've been just like individual homeowners is a really one part of an answer, which I think is a little bit surprising. There's just a lot of people who own land and are kind of afraid, and also have children. And the question of, so you're all in the Bay Area. Like, how are the next generation that's growing up being able to find a home, ownership or not? And so I think that it's not quite an answer to your question, but I think it's a really important point that there's a lot of people that have been lucky enough to figure out a way to own a home in the past, and they're holding on to it. And that those partnerships have I've been just like wonderful to watch come out and to be extremely strong. And then there's the organization side. So community land trusts constantly. I think we're all trying to get towards a similar goal, and everyone's just trying to figure out what are the different tools that exist and ways of combining them thoughtfully. Feel free to just jump in. But
I have some thoughts, but I wanted to just give Jeff and Andrew a chance, and then if there's anything to add, I can.
Yeah, I guess I would just say I think it's cool that we have two different presenters here, and it seems like we're approaching it from two different ends. Like you're working with the homeowner and the future residents from the beginning. That's something we would love to do in the future, but thus far we've kind of done new construction projects. So kind of the developer sponsor model. And it's a very similar process to any other housing development, really. I mean, the key difference is the organizational structure and the development of the cooperative itself, right? And so as you get into construction of the housing, you simultaneously are beginning to kind of develop the structure of the co-op. And so I think sort of some of the pre-development and structuring the co-op based on the type of project you're doing, and then also the training of the initial residents who likely don't have experience in necessarily managing and maintaining a cooperative, and then the ongoing support or management that you might provide depending on the cooperative management structure that's adopted. And we've kind of found that really depends on largely on like the size of the co-op, smaller co-ops versus larger co-ops in terms of self-management versus an outside property manager type situation. But in terms of partners, I think just due to the fact that cooperatives are so unfamiliar on the West Coast, there aren't really a lot of existing organizations out there to partner with to supply some of these services. So, we've really had to do a lot of it ourselves in terms of providing those extra support and training pieces. And so developing that capacity within our organization, I think is something we're currently working on, because I think that's really kind of our constraint, right? It's not necessarily developing the housing, but being able to set those cooperatives up for success and having the right structure. So we're really trying to kind of streamline that so that we can do that a little better and have a better staffing capacity to help with that. Yeah.
I think it's interesting to hear that Frolic, that you guys have found a credit union to help with share loans. I think we're currently with our Peace Village project, like we're essentially creating, having to create like our own revolving loan fund to help people, with purchasing a share. And, you know, the idea is that that would be also like later help people sell their interest in the co-op, just because it makes it easier for somebody else to at that income to buy it. So yeah, like working with finding lenders. I mean, we've been really fortunate because pretty much all of our like equity in our project has come from like grants or fundraisers that we've done. Finding
first two, I would say.
Yeah, finding blanket financing has required us to really do some education with lenders about kind of how the arrangement works. The last thing I'll mention too, just it seems a little sort of similar with the idea of what you guys are doing, finding like existing property owners to partner with. The project we're building right now is being built on land that's owned by, or that was previously owned by a church. And a lot of like churches own a lot of real estate, but their memberships are shrinking and they are interested in doing something about housing. And so they were, I think that's something that we're pursuing. Since we've purchased that property, several other churches in our area have gotten in touch with us who just have like excess property that's developable and that, you know, meets their congregations like missions to build affordable housing on.
Yeah.
Oscar, feel free.
Yeah, I have two questions. So I'm curious, when it comes to the capital stack, how do you structure it in that sense? I guess, how do you determine, you know, share price, investor buy-in, and then also, let's say one of the residents loses their job, how do you cover, you know, their missing income? And how do you structure that into essentially a safety net? So the structure, you know, essentially the co-op doesn't default on their loan.
I could start. I mean, I think, yeah, especially your last question is so just the reality of life and so deeply important. What I'll start there and we can share both answers. But something that we've been making kind of a requirement in all of our projects is to have pretty much just a really robust operating and debt service reserve that is able to, like in our first project, 6 months. So it's if let's say this is a 10-home project, if every single person in the project lost their job, the project will be able to pay all of the debt service and all the operating expenses for the entire project for up to 8 months. So this creates, and we can share this with all of you in more detail later, but basically it is like a cushion to be able to make sure that if people can't make their payments, they aren't just immediately evicted. And then there's a process. And what ends up happening is that you take out a lien on their resident share. So for the amount that you're covering, which allows the co-op to then recoup that amount. And so I'd say that for us, so much of it is design, so much of it is financing, and a huge amount of it is the legal process and figuring out how do you, and it can be tailored by any group and what they want. But what we've been working towards is like, how do you create a system where it doesn't require like personal kindness between individuals, but you have a system setting it up. And the hope that also creates kind of can reduce some of the conflict within a group, but also just support people in the realities of life.
No, that's helpful, just because, we're running into, we have a pilot project that we're working on, but finding a developer that actually take on the project is a little difficult just because it's such a small project, right? It's not 70 units, it's only 30, it's 25 to 30 units. And so it's a fairly small project considering that they're used to 100 unit projects. And so, that's kind of been a challenge for us, is finding that partner who is willing to take on that type of project, but also be willing to work with us and the residents, because we are dealing with like extremely low income folks for this project. So that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we're focusing on a lot is 6 to 10 unit projects. And then we've started to have looking at the kind of the 20 to 30 range. So it is hard finding developers that are willing to do a project that's that small. Something for us is that we have a set fee that doesn't change depending on the size. Like, it's not like a percent of all in costs, which I think also can create a distorted relationship. Yeah, and so I don't want to talk for too long. I guess Andrew, Jeff, do you want to add anything to this? Either
I thought I might go ahead and share a screen to give you guys a sense of how our projects work in terms of the relationships and the finance. Well, what screen did I share? There it is, sorry. So this is just kind of the simplest way I could put this together to kind of explain the overall picture. So SquareOne is kind of operating under a community land trust type model. We acquire the land and also act as the developer. And so in terms of, the capital stack, it really depends on the target population you're serving. We've done co-op projects serving anywhere from 15 to 80% AMI, and the ones at the bottom are very different than the ones at the top of that range. Just increasing the amount of subsidy you need, and also the amount of debt you can take on, and also the amount of share purchase that an individual might be able to access. And so I kind of mentioned this, so we retain ownership of the land in order to retain permanent affordability controls, and also to provide ongoing support to the limited equity cooperative. The limited equity cooperative owns the housing on the land. And then there's a long-term 99-year ground lease that ties the interests of both parties together. This also helps the co-op access up to a fairly large blanket loan that's secured against both the land and the housing. And then the loan goes to the limited equity cooperative. And then, this can change depending on how many members of the cooperative there are. They're each, they each pay a membership share purchase is the upfront cost. And in our projects, that's been, in our Peace Village cooperative, it's just a $5,000 share purchase, because we're serving people in like the 30 to 50% AMI range. In our C Street co-op, it was $20,000 in the 60 to 80% AMI range. And we were actually, those folks were actually able to qualify for down payment assistance through CDBG grants that covered half of that. So they were just responsible for $10,000. So that's just like an example of how you can get creative. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about the cooperative model, is that you can kind of get creative with the financing structure and blends between blanket loans and share loans, and being able to mix that up depending on what you're trying to do and who you're trying to serve. I think obviously the big constraint is that, particularly on the West Coast or any area where co-ops are unfamiliar, getting any sort of share loan is pretty difficult to do. I think there's only one market rate co-op in Oregon, and we started this group, Garland, who's on the call, Oregon Cooperative Housing Network, to try to kind of organize folks interested throughout the state in that. And one of the members lives in this market rate co-op in Portland, and it's almost exclusively older folks that have a large amount of cash, because they're able to purchase those shares up front. And so being able to crack that nut of share loan seems to be a a big issue, and I'd be interested to learn more about how you guys have had some success with that. So there's that upfront share purchase, and then each member of the co-op has a proprietary lease that gives them right to exclusively access one of the units within the co-op, and they pay a monthly carrying charge, which covers all housing costs, including a proportional rate of the blanket loan held by the co-op. So I thought that might just give you guys a overall picture of
That's really helpful.
how we're approaching it. That's on our website too, under the Peace Village page, if you want to see it again. But yeah, are
And
there any
quick-
questions related
Yeah,
to that?
quick note. I'm curious about, because we're dealing with folks who are undocumented, and how do you secure those type of loans?
I don't,
One of the real reasons that we're pursuing like the limited equity cooperative model is because it provides a pathway to home ownership without each individual having to qualify for a mortgage. So like in a CLT model, traditionally, each household still has to qualify for a mortgage. In the model I just showed, the cooperative qualifies for the mortgage, and none of the individuals in our project have to qualify for a loan necessarily.
we did, I mentioned like a revolving loan fund for share purchases for the Peace project that we're building now. We did finance a couple share purchases at that smaller C Street project. And so we have, like, when we did that, we were able to just make those loans. And we have like a security agreement that allows, if there's a default on that share loan, SquareOne is able, or potentially whoever is the lender, would be able to take back the occupancy rights associated with that membership. And none of that required like any kind of citizenship verification or anything like that. I think that is kind of like a benefit if that's a concern. It's not like a tax credit project or Section 8 or anything where you have to provide that kind of information.
No,
But
that's
it's
helpful.
still legally enforceable.
And then just to follow up on that, so there's two things to that. Is there one person taking on the loan because they would have to put up their assets, right? Or is that what y'all are doing? And then is that where you create the revolving loan from?
So, for the share loans, you mean?
Yeah,
Or for
so
blanket mortgage?
for the blanket mortgage.
So the blanket mortgage is held by the cooperative corporation, and that's kind of one of the main advantages of a co-op project, is the individual members don't have to qualify for their own mortgage. It's just the cooperative corporation holds that debt. The share loans were loans to an individual for that portion. But the blanket mortgage is held by the cooperative, which is kind of one of the main advantages of doing it as a cooperative.
This might also, Jeff, let me know if this is helpful at all. I'm thinking that, where's the capital stack?
Oh, here, I'll get to it.
All right, so I think what's nice with the co-op is, so here, can you see my cursor? So you have like a $4 million project, let's just say, and you can just break up the capital stack in many, many different ways. So this is an example, so the red boxes are the resident shares that people are purchasing, and they can take out a share loan mortgage. But let's say, so as an individual, you're paying your share loan mortgage if you have one, and you're paying a co-op fee, and that co-op fee is paying the operating expenses of the whole project and then paying the debt service of the blanket loan. And so what you can end up doing is just changing the capital stack in various ways. So if you're looking at residents where they're not able to secure a share loan, you could reduce the sizes of these resident shares and since those people won't be paying a share loan mortgage, they could be contributing that money to their co-op fees, which is paying debt service off of the larger blanket mortgage. So that allows the project to take
kind of more of the end that we've approached.
Yeah. So just as Andrew's saying, as everyone's saying, like the flexibility within the co-op system, like structure, just allows you to tailor it.
There's a lot of different ways that you could do it. It's kind of the nice thing about it.
But obviously being able to increase like the share amount, then that amount being paid down is going to individual equity, right? Whereas when you're paying down the mortgage, the equity's staying with the cooperative. So that's kind of the trade-off.
And yeah, and that really, like the individual equity building part, like the kind of individual wealth creation part is really not really what we're emphasizing with our projects. We're kind of focusing more on just the permanent affordability part. But that again is also like a trade-off that you can adjust depending on what your goals are.
Something that the credit union we're working with is called Verity in Seattle, and they see this product as a great way to serve sort of their community, and it's a smaller loan than a typical house, and it's a way to build credit for people who don't have great credit, and they're also really kind of have a program for alternative forms of credit if people have poor credit scores or don't have a score. They also said that they're like very happy to share their product with other credit unions and like share their learnings. So that's something that like if you have CDFIs or credit unions that could be interested, Verity I'm sure would be open to meeting with them and kind of sharing their experience and why they set up the product and all that.
That'd be super cool. We would definitely be interested in learning more about that. Are those loans like, what is the security for those loans? Is it the occupancy rights or?
It's the share. It's the resident share, which gives the occupancy agreement. Like it gives.
Yeah. Associated with the cool.
And did they develop like a new product for that, or is it just like a variation of their typical personal loan, or?
They created a new product for it.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah,
that's cool.
We'd love to see what they did with that. Yeah.
And I'll say that as we expand to Oregon and California, I mean, we also are just looking for credit unions because flexible lenders are helpful for residents. And so if there's names of credit unions that you all are familiar with, we can also help those conversations happen. It's a large part of our work.
Then there's one. Oh, sorry.
That'd be cool. I guess like one other thing I'd say, I don't know how much this exists in other states, but Oregon has a program called individual development accounts, which is like a matched savings product that different CDFIs provide for low-income households, and it's supposed to be used specifically to purchase an asset, usually either like a car or a house. And we do have one person at the C Street project who's using that matched savings like asset building program to purchase their share. Like that's been something that was approved by the IDA program.
Very cool.
Also say that another part of our work is figuring out how to bring in investment from a community. So if we are all looking at capital stacks and trying to allow households with lower incomes to purchase them. So part of it is the low down payments, and then figuring out the monthly payments as well. And so I guess I'm just saying that is another opportunity. It's kind of like your revolving loan fund, and it could be held by the co-op or it could be held by a person's resident share. But that's just, in a sense, it's like there's so many tools out there, and so how do you figure out which tools will be helpful?
One other plug I would love to make just to this group is that there's two like larger initiatives around expanding just the ecosystem for co-ops that we're looking just to add voices to. One is we're in the very early phases of thinking through a pilot with HUD and the FHA to update their 213 program to make it faster and work better for smaller projects. And we're trying to put together a one-pager for that, which is helping us document that like there is demand for this. There's groups around the country that are trying to build co-ops that could really benefit from that mortgage insurance or that insurance program for construction loans. So if y'all are interested, that would be great if you were open to being a part of the one pager, just like express that like, yes, this would be great. And or join the conversation for that. That would be really helpful. And then the other is we're trying to design a pilot program with the National Co-op Bank and either Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac to get the share loans that work within what we're doing, which is kind of a more limited equity structure, to work on the secondary market and meet their guidelines. And I think that could really open up access to share loan products. Also for down payment assistance, which like for us, we can't use any of the DPA programs in Washington because they don't qualify. Our share loans don't qualify for the secondary market.
Yeah, that is obviously like kind of another one of the big finance obstacles, is just because they're not really securitizable. I know that Fannie Mae is that like the Community Land Trust Association spent several years working with Fannie Mae, and I think they buy mortgages on CLT houses. So yeah, if there's an initiative for share loans, actually that would be pretty interesting to us as well.
Cool.
And so for the two requests, I don't want to speak for the group, but since we have a large number group here today, like I'm just curious, are you guys open for working with Frolic on those two large initiatives, with one with like the pilot with HUD and that one pager, as well as that national like investment to kind of change that secondary market? Feel free to unmute and just hop in.
We would, yeah, it would be interesting in terms of capacity wise, like just to ask, what is ask and what would the support look like from our end?
I think for the HUD one pager, it's really just to add your name to the list.
Okay.
Station's name to that list of like, and to add your name and like what you're looking at developing, how many units and like what projects are in your pipeline that could benefit from this. Part of it when we talked to HUD before was that they would need to invest a lot of staff hours to kind of get a new product going. And so they want to see that there's actual demand for it and they could see about a certain volume. So the more like, yeah, we're looking at these projects, the more we can add to that, the stronger of a case it will be. Cool, thanks.
Oh, so I think there are some questions I think Monet is asking. It's like, what's the volume do they want to see? But it sounds like for that one pager for HUD, I think the Co-ops initiative probably is very down for that, just to add that information. But if you want to answer that question for what's the volume they want to see?
They're really open to it. I mean, so we're basically working with the two people at HUD that interact with that program, and the more the volume that there is, the more political power that can be behind them when they try to change a huge bureaucratic system. I mean,
they would love to see like over 100 loans a year, ideally, countrywide. That was something they threw out when I talked to them. Right now they're doing about 10.
On this topic, have you guys been in touch with like anybody in like the Northeast? Like I know, this is all very unfamiliar on the West Coast, but I know like in DC and New York, like share loans are pretty accessible and such. I don't know exactly how they are accessed, but I imagine that would certainly add to your volume, right?
Part of it is just the new construction co-op. There's not a lot of new construction co-ops.
Right. It's mostly like rehab stuff.
You're right on that one.
But if you have relationships with orgs that are either doing rehabs and like conversions, that's also relevant for 213. Totally.
Right.
well, we'll just share information, and if people are open to it and want to spread it out, I think it's work that it could take a long time to do, and it could have a tremendous impact. But yeah, everyone's capacity is light. It's the reality of life. So
yeah.
And you guys, sorry, I was just gonna say, you guys have our Co-ops initiative like group email, right?
Yeah.
So you can just share like more details on that, and I think we can just move forward with that for both of the initiatives, because I do see like interest for both of them within the group, just as you said, like how much capacity people can move into. And Oscar, I do want to make room for your question, but I also want to just check in to see if like, do you guys still want to cover some of the questions that we haven't asked the speakers related to I think there was some related support roles, specific ones of co-ops developed with other key partners, because I know that was one that you've been asking several times, and wasn't sure if we covered it enough or what the people in this group needs for moving forward. I'm looking at both Vanessa, Ileana, Oscar on this question.
Yeah, that's fine. I also want to come back to Ileana's question about the revolving fund and how that started. But maybe we can come back to that later on and go into the development stuff. But that is a question we would like to find out too.
I guess
Okay,
what I would just add into your like earlier question about like trying to find a developer and not finding a lot of interest in the cooperative, like that doesn't surprise me. I think you're going to struggle to find like existing people in the existing housing development world that are going to take on a cooperative project, because it doesn't really make sense financially unless you're kind of like mission driven. And so like in terms of being able to access resources that you can access on other housing projects, and I think this comes to the question in terms of regulation change, is like one thing we found is that like most public policy related to housing is sort of binary of either multifamily rental housing or single family home ownership, and cooperatives kind of fall somewhere in between. Like two of the things we're working on right now in the state legislature is allowing limited equity cooperatives to qualify for a property tax exemption and a state affordable housing tax credit. So these are two things that rental projects use to reach deeper affordability levels that currently aren't accessible to cooperatives. So I just use that as an example of like why would a developer take on a cooperative project when it's just very hard, because the policy is kind of stacked against you, I would say. And so you kind of have to become your own developer is what I would say. And we didn't necessarily set out with knowing that that's kind of the role we would take. It kind of just happened through the fact of nobody else doing what we wanted to do.
There's two quick things. One, I was completely forgot it. The second thing, what we're doing at Frolic is we're partnering with local organizations and local developers, and then we're kind of bringing in the co-op expertise. So that's something that, like, I mean, we would love to work with the organization and like kind of bringing the co-op element to it. And that's something that maybe as you're talking to developers, seeing like what is their hesitation in it, and if there's a group that is connected to the financing for co-ops, yeah,
then their role can be more traditional or conventional. They're just getting the thing built. And another thing we didn't mention before, but that's important for how we've been able to build in Seattle, is that during construction, maybe I'll just share an image just to illustrate this. During the construction of the projects, we've kind of had to, for the sake of getting things built, build the projects and permit them as something that looks conventional to an appraiser and to a bank. And so this project, as an example, is permitted as 4 townhomes, but each of them have an ADU in the bottom level. And in the end, it'll be a 7-unit project in a common house. But during construction, the construction lender is looking at it as a very conventional product. And so they're using an appraisal for selling them off as single family homes, but then, and that allows them to kind of just do their thing. And for a developer, they could see it as just a conventional product. But then when it's built, it's converting to the co-op, and the co-op is purchasing the project. And so that's also like, that reduces the complexity immensely of getting stuff built. If you're able to, if it makes sense for the project, is like taking those two lenses, separating construction out from the permanent phase and trying to make construction fit as much within a box, the conventional box, as possible, can really reduce headache and like the complexity of the project. But it's also like a fine balance to walk, and it's a design challenge. Like you really gotta find that middle ground. So
yeah, maybe just important to say the partners question. I think working with an architect that has a really good understanding of community design is important. I mean, for us, that's a big part of our role, is working with architects that naturally have that ability, but making sure that, even more so, because if you're building a co-op, you just need to be very, very thoughtful about, it's like the physical design, the financial design, and like just the social aspects of it. And people are living alongside each other and co-owning a project. And so those details are just very, very important. And then quick small thing, Andrew, I just remembered, for your multifamily tax exemption piece, we're receiving that from in Washington. So if you want to talk and compare notes, if you're trying to get that to happen in Oregon. So
Sure,
for
yeah.
ownership for our co-op projects, we're able to get property tax exemptions.
Is it under a certain AMI?
Yeah, under about 110% AMI.
I guess just to answer the question about the revolving loan that we're planning on starting, that's just being capitalized with like money that we've fundraised and like different grants that we've written up to this point. We're not like forming a separate CDFI or anything for that at this point. We'll see how it goes, but that's kind of just been something that we're doing internally at this point with I think some certain donors, I think, found it an appealing thing to provide money to because it would kind of last and grow ideally.
Wait, Jeff, do you said that certain learners found it appealing or unappealing to invest in?
I think donors find it, I mean, donors that would otherwise be just providing money to go towards like construction or something find it appealing because if you're doing it as a revolving loan fund, that resource will last and grow ideally.
Hello, if I may add, Ileana Nicholas with EPA Can Do in East Palo Alto. Jeffrey, to your question, to your comment right now about the revolving loan fund, I think earlier you mentioned that it revolves every time they buy out their share, they sell their share. How often do you anticipate that time frame being? Is it 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? How fast does it revolve?
Probably not very often. What we've done so far now is just said that we would lend money for those shares for up to 5 year terms at like 3 to maybe 4% interest, which just matches the maximum resale value for the cooperative shares, just so that it's not like losing value. So a lot will depend on like how well that revolving loan functions is going to depend on probably not super frequent share transfers, which we don't have any reason to expect. We have really low turnover at the existing projects.
Thank you. And I'm just now getting myself familiar with share loans and what a blanket mortgage means for a co-op. Can share loans be like refinanced by the individual shareholder to maybe revolve the funds faster, or I don't know, for whatever reason people refinance loans? I
think potentially, I guess for us, the way we set it up is that anybody that's financing a share loan, like if they're putting up their share and their occupancy rights as collateral, then both the cooperative and SquareOne Villages have to approve whatever the arrangement is. But conceivably, if they could find somebody that would lend to them against it, I think it's conceivable that they could do something like that. I don't know about the more standardized product that the credit union is put together.
That's a big kind of objective of ours in terms of the wealth building piece of it too, is to allow people to refinance and pull out value from their home for larger expenses as their shares appreciate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And there's actually an interesting question that came up in the chat. And Dwayne, let me know if you want to speak to it first, or I can just read it for you.
No, go right ahead.
Okay, so a lot of the discussion has been about like site level projects, right? Like several homes in one lot or one specific large multifamily building. And I'm just wondering about like relationships between like site level and town level, because one of the projects is like looking at scatter sites co-ops, and they're doing like a town scale co-op with site level governance for daily aspect, and they're like a small town. Just wondering if you guys have experience with that kind of scale co-ops.
There's another older co-op that's a limited equity co-op in Eugene called the East Blair Housing Cooperative that was started in the late 70s. And they've actually managed to expand and purchase some neighboring houses, like where they're located when they've been up for sale. And I don't think they're all like in a single mortgage, but it's something that the co-op has been able to do. And yeah, I think it's possible.
I'd say that that's something that us at Frolic are like deeply, deeply interested in. We're urban planners. That's a lot of what our background is. And so when you're thinking about a neighborhood transforming over time and thinking about how do you, there's just so many thoughts. It's like my head is just spiraling. If you want to jump in, you can. But
I'm curious about the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. I know that that's something that they're doing. I don't know enough about it, but I know that they have more of a scattered site approach.
When we've been working with lenders and even just like National Co-op Bank, which more on the conventional side, it is something that they're very open to. And in Seattle, for example, there's in the Central District is an area where a lot of the projects in our pipeline are, and a lot of the homeowners that are like particularly facing displacement, because that's where the upzones happened and property taxes are increasing. And so exploring with different homeowners, doing a scattered site projects. And so it's something that I think, Andrew, as you're saying, like it could be that it expands over time and becomes more of a scattered site. You start with one project and it grows, or you're working with like multiple pieces of land and you're able to leverage the land. And you could also phase out the construction if that's what made sense. There's a lot of flexibility that can come. Also complication, which is always expensive. So, but I think that just really understanding the nuances of a neighborhood and how different projects are weaving together and how land and homes are incredible resources and there's so many other things that you can build. And there's also potential for commercial and really just understanding like the economic story of a neighborhood and figuring out how do you help individuals have ownership of land, which is so important. And also like creating an ecosystem together so that they can be supported in like hard economic times and good economic times. Help people that maybe don't live actively in the homes also own a piece of the real estate and be able to also participate in some of the appreciation, which can bring down the payments for the homeowners. There's a lot of just very special creative things that could happen.
I guess I would just say, I think that's one of the things we're interested in our organization is like, we're kind of creating these autonomous entities of different co-ops, right? And if we keep doing that, how can we kind of take advantage of economies of scale and provide services to those co-ops? Because I think like historically, if you look at any time cooperatives have been built at any sort of scale, either in the US or internationally, there's usually some sort of umbrella entity that's kind of leading that. And I think that's an important component to it, so I think like the revolving loan is one of our concepts of how, you could give access to that across co-ops, but I think there's a lot of other ideas around that can help with like the scalability of this concept rather than just creating isolated co-ops in different neighborhoods and such.
Thank you for sharing that. Ileana or Dwayne, was there any other follow-ups you want to share related to that? Because I think it was like an open-ended discussion, like they're very interested in your project.
The only thing I would say, part of the reason that we're looking at it is just opportunistic, that we have a range of acquisition opportunities. Some mobile homes, a condo that we already own. Somebody has a lot that we can build a number of units on. There's a 30-year-old co-housing existing project where the founders are aging out that they'd like to donate. And so it's just it's all, you know, more or less the whole town's a kind of a 1 mile radius area. And we're trying to just create a context for a situation that we already have and just make use of opportunities. So, hey, you know, we're trying to reverse engineer into it. Is what it comes down to.
Got it.
I think it's, I mean, I definitely think it's totally possible, and there'd probably be a lot of reasons to try to, you know, bring a range of assets like that under the umbrella of a single cooperative that's going to own and manage it. I'm sure there's also like a lot of complications, but yeah, pooling resources is kind of the whole point of the cooperative structure. So
we're also, one of the areas that we're looking at really closely, it's been mentioned, the property tax aspects. California has there's work to be done to blur it, but a pretty bright line separation between ownership and rental. And we also, as an organization, we have a whole portfolio of rental units that are tax exempt. So one of the ideas we're kicking around is to split off make the share owning part be more like an IDA that's parallel and joined, but there's you're part of the co-op as a renter with just close enough to the line that we can preserve the tax, the welfare tax exemption on the ownership structure side, and then just couple it at the hip with basically an IDA kind of, you know, it's like probably a mandatory contribution to a share fund until you reach a certain level or something like that. Because as you mentioned, the property tax hit is large. So anyway, but this is all super interesting. Thank you so much.
I guess, you know, where we've had success in our state legislature, you know, I've been trying to kind of explain it as kind of resident-owned rental housing in a way, because it's actually developed and financed exactly like rental housing. It just so happens that at the end of the day, the residents collectively own it rather than an outside landlord. So like a limited equity co-op actually like meets the intention of most public policy. It's more of like the caveat of it might say tenants, and members of a co-op aren't technically tenants under Oregon law, for example. So there's like some minor tweaking that needs to be done. But at the end of the day, you know, there's a single loan on the project and residents are paying into a common fund to pay it down. You know, for example, with our property tax exemption and our state tax credits, you have to be able to show that that savings is directly going to reducing the monthly housing costs of the member, right? And that's difficult with single family home ownership, but it can be done with a limited equity cooperative. And so it's really kind of an educational exercise in getting people to think a little bit differently, which can be frustrating at times, but I think we're getting somewhere.
And I'm curious to know a little bit more on that. I know I've heard from other folks that, you know, California is not the friendliest when it comes to co-ops, especially the law portion of that. Is that the same, you know, for, you know, Tam? Is that something that y'all a law team that you're all working with? Is that something that they're highlighting, or what are they saying or seeing from their point of view?
I would say we don't have a good enough answer to that question to be responsible and respond to it yet. we're coming from Washington, which it's a strange thing because it can be helpful and unhelpful when there's laws addressing what you're trying to do. And it requires getting many steps further into the process to understand where the exact realities are. There's also ways of, building co-ops that aren't technically co-op. So it's like really understanding what are the systems and figuring out how to maneuver within it while building what feels and is a co-op.
I think a small example of that is that our projects, we've, at least in Seattle, opted to make conventional co-ops. And one of the ways that expresses itself is that they're eligible for Section 216 of the revenue tax code, which means that the homeowners can deduct interest on the blanket mortgage payments, just like a homeowner of a single family home would. That's like an example of it being like a cookie cutter co-op in some way, is that like it meets that guideline. But it could just as well be our own creation and we could call it a co-op. It wouldn't meet that, but we could do more creative things with it if we didn't fit in that box. So there's like co-ops from the old days that have some state and federal regulation that meets that, speaks to those. And then there's more out of the box that might not meet those requirements, but you can call anything a co-op in some ways. Like you can create your own entity structure, use some of the aspects of a co-op and have it be an LLC. It can be a non-charitable nonprofit. Like there's a lot of ways of building co-ops and creating co-ops legally.
I could also add, in Oregon, there's been a lot of interest and success lately in applying the cooperative model to the manufactured dwelling parks as a preservation program. I imagine that's probably happening in the Washington and California as well. So, I think that's something we've been able to point to that I think a lot of people see as a successful model, and applying and adapting similar policies to multifamily rental housing is kind of the approach we've been taking. So the tenant opportunity to purchase was something that was in our legislature this year. It didn't make much traction, but it introduced the concept, and I think we're going to work on it again next year. I think that's also, I don't know what the status or progress of it, but that's also something that's being considered currently in California.
Tamara and Josh, I wonder if I could ask you a little bit about the deal that you offer existing homeowners. Like if they have a single family home and you're trying to get them to say yes to this conversion into a cooperative. Are you offering straight up purchase, like you give them the market value of their home and then they reinvest those funds with you? Or is it more of a barter and trade system where you're securing against the equity in the home and giving them a share in the co-op, but they're not actually getting the multi-$100,000 check at any point in the process?
In a sense, it's a mixture of the two, except your last point, they're not getting a multi-$100,000 check at any point. But I don't want to go too far into detail, but they basically contribute their land. They get fair market value for the land. So there's no bartering. They get fair market value for their land. They then earn as much of a return that any investor in the development project would get. So we're offering between a 7 to 10% return, which is kind of a lot of what we're doing is figuring out how to bring in conventional investors with maybe a slightly lower return, but figuring out how to not reliant on subsidies and kind of using the money and the capital that's out there circulating. So they contribute their home into the project. They're getting a return on that equity. There's a couple points in time where they're able to take out some cash if they need to. Like one example would be like paying rent for another property while the project's under construction. Or if they have a lot of debt on a credit card that they would like to just wipe out, so they're not paying a giant interest for another year. And then once the project is built, they will have their choice of unit and some leftover. Usually then there's some additional cash. So they'll buy their share outright and then have some additional cash that they'll use to help significantly lower any of their housing payments going forward.
I can just give an example is one of our homeowners has about $450,000 in equity in her home. And when the project is done, she'll have a unit that's worth about $300,000. And then she'll have $150,000 of cash from that equity that's paid to her when the project is done. So after construction is complete, and then she'll get about a $40,000 return on the equity that she's contributed throughout that process. She'll end up with around $190,000 in a new unit. And then her monthly living expenses will be around $1,000 a month. And currently they're about $2,000 a month on her mortgage. So she'll be spending less per month for her home, and she'll have a new house and some cash out.
And I guess a follow-up question, are you guys, it looks like on some of these projects, you're demolishing the existing house and developing new housing. So what happens in that in-between period, I guess, for the homeowner?
Yeah, so if it ever makes sense not to demolish the home, very interested in that for all the obvious reasons. But in a lot of cases, it just is what financially is needed. Wow, my brain just keeps losing itself. I also was reading a question. Do you remember the question?
Yeah, so they construction. So she'll get when construction starts, she'll get $30,000, and that'll cover her rent through construction of her equity portion. So that's like during that year, but all through permitting.
She's using part of equity to rent a house during that period. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It's kind of subsidizing that rent, and particularly if there's a difference between her current monthly expenses and that. If there's not, like if her mortgage is similar to what it is to rent, then it's kind of a wash for her, and she can just get that money. All the entitlements, like the year of permitting, she'll stay in her home and keep paying her mortgage. So she'll just like be there. It's just during the period of construction.
How involved are they during finding other members?
Different people are like, it can vary a lot, but we've been seeing it like a lot of involvement. So I mean, you're really building your community, and it's been also shocking, wild, and incredible to see people not just trying to offer the units to people within their personal limited community, and seeing a lot more openness and
white homeowners getting non-white people to live in the project, and like tapping into community groups, and because it's like there's a lot of just like, okay, I got access to this home, and that was, part of I contributed to this place that's happened in this neighborhood, and I want to use my property to shift that going forward. So there's been like more of that than we anticipated. And then for the non-white homeowners we're working with, that is like, they're the kind of bringing their children, their community into the projects, and that we feel good about. It's like, it's a natural way for a group to have cohesion and to kind of market it in a way, like bring people that. And then the nice thing about that is we can then match the design to the affordability and income of those future residents. We have more of an idea of who's going to live in the projects from the beginning.
Oscar?
Yeah, no, that brings up a good point. So how has the real estate industry in your, Tim and Josh really reacted to something like this? Just because we've been trying to push COPA and we've been getting a lot of backlash.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, is that something you also hear from the real estate industry on the projects that you're working on, that this is something they're fearful of?
That they're fearful of homeowners' involvement?
Essentially taking, because essentially I guess jeopardizing the industry in a way is what we hear. And so how you working with, the homeowner and then putting an ADU on it, essentially, does that cause any friction in the real estate industry?
I think what we've seen is the conventional real estate industry sees enough opportunity for themselves that there isn't a threat. I mean, we are working with homeowners that are like, sent a letter every week from a different developer trying to purchase it. We've just been honestly just very blessed in the way that we've been received from a lot of people. I think that if anyone it's such a niche world that it's not, and also working on smaller projects. There's, I mean, maybe that 20 to 30 unit project might be something that a more conventional, even like a conventional affordable housing rental, tech developer maybe would be going after. So,
And then just we've had way more interest from homeowners than we anticipated. We have a wait list of 40 homeowners right now. And it's like a real need, at least here, of people that don't want to sell their home and want a way to stay in their neighborhoods.
That's sweet.
I see a question in the chat. If we have people waiting to join the co-op, what are they called? Do they commit in order? Do they commit to anything in order to be in the queue? We're building cohorts of interested buyers and getting them pre-qualified. And what we've been, for our first projects, we've really focused on an affirmative marketing process so that we actually haven't gone public on any of them. And we're doing meet and greets so people can kind of get to know the project, what it's about, and start getting pre-qualified with Verity Credit Union before we open them up to the broader public. And part of that is just like home buyer training, getting people familiar with what it is to own a home, what a co-op is, how that works, and giving people who aren't really like on the hunt for housing a chance to get these homes. Yeah.
a hunt for homeownership housing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Oscar was maybe referring a little bit more to the pushback that we're seeing at the city level in San Jose and at the state level in Oregon from realtor groups against TOPA-COPA legislation. They see that as a threat to their pandering to big moneyed interests that I guess is kind of in the blood of most realtors. I'm a licensed real estate broker in the state of Oregon, so I think that there are progressive realtors out there that, especially in cities, who may individually see the benefit of co-ops, but I think we all have some work to do to connect those progressive realtors who understand it, what co-ops are and what their benefit are, with the very, very conservative realtor industry groups that are coming out and fighting legislation at the municipal and state level, who may have a financial interest in opposing this, or perceived financial interest in opposing this because of their big money clients, or I'm not quite certain what that is, but
yeah, I think it is pretty in direct opposition to a lot of developers too. It ties up their process. It slows down their ability to act, or for property owners to sell. So there is that something that the city of Seattle is in looking at their TOPA legislation, and also the city is trying to explore how ready is kind of the CLT nonprofit affordable housing developer community ready, like how much capability do we have to do conversions? If there is good TOPA legislation in place, can we actually organize resident groups and do a rehab and conversion quickly enough? And like, you know, the time it gets you is just maybe a couple months. There's a lot that needs to happen there. So there's a little bit of chicken and egg too. It's like, until you've got the legislation, you can't get the groups organized. But there's also like on all of our sides, like how do we get a quick process in place to help organize tenant groups, do a conversion, get financing for rehab and put in an offer. So I think that's like it's a really good, I imagine it only helps the process to have like groups like ours kind of have a process in mind and in place. Like if you give us a month or two, we can do it, you know, with an organized resident group.
No, that's a really good point. That's what we're running into. Like our main focus is to do conversions or preservation. And we just had the opportunity to do a brand new development. But we are running into the, you know, I wouldn't say the problem just yet, but we are conscious of the education piece that comes with that, with the preservation thing, because the education of the co-op is one process, and then actually getting the I would say like the business entity for the co-op actually created is another process. And we're also working with a pre-existing co-op that's running into issues with property management that's trying to take the property away from them. And so kind of navigating those different spaces is, you know, like you were saying, it's a chicken or the egg thing at that point.
Yeah, it's a really large ecosystem that's required too. And it's just like a lot of different pieces.
I think we're all in this together. I do have one last question, and it's probably like 1 minute each. But it's been burning my mind as you guys have been talking about this. Because some of the threads I've been hearing is that, first the Frolic, you have been that key co-op expertise, navigating all the different relationships and kind of bringing all those people together to get these projects off the ground. And it sounds like SquareOne Villages, you've been taking on that mantle yourself of like being your own developer. So we just say in a lot of for like co-op project, there does need to be a specific stakeholder in the process that has that kind of like understanding of co-ops and how it connects to all those various different players.
Nobody wants to jump on that one.
I'm
mean,
sorry,
think,
like,
go ahead.
oh, no, you go ahead, Andy.
I was just going to say the short answer is yes. I mean, you need somebody in the process that understands. I think that's what you're asking, the cooperative structure and I guess why it's being proposed and the benefits of it. I guess I'm not sure I entirely understand the question.
I think it like, yeah, I mean, they are kind of like total social facts, to use like a weird word. So because they do touch on like the financial part, the social and everyday life part. There's implications for design, physical design, legal and ownership. So they do connect up all those things. I think that's definitely something that's really been brought home to me since we've been doing this. And I do think that there really needs to be familiarity with a lot of those implications, because they all do kind of fit together like a puzzle.
I think it was really, really well said. One thing to add to that is just knowing of the things that you would never expect to come and stop a project. Like an appraisal would be just like an example of the conventional, the industry is trying to help, like they know what they know. And if you're building anything that might look different at any point in the process, there's just going to be so many hurdles. And I think working with someone who can identify those, because everyone's capacity is low, and a project that just gets extended and extended and the bank falls through at the last moment. There's just, yeah, there's a lot of things you don't know. So I think having that knowledge, and that can come in many different ways. But it's hard work to do. Also, like community land trusts are hard work to do. So it's just not recreating the wheel every time, I think, is really important, just as as an overall community, and figuring out like, how do we take all of our expertises in different ways and then not make projects really expensive by paying everyone, but like, figuring out how to like actually weave together the puzzle pieces in a way that works is like, I think the challenge that we're all going to continuously be faced with if we keep going down this path, which I hope we do.
Thank you both for such wonderful answers, and that totally answered the question I had. And I think we are definitely going to be on this journey together. And with that, we're up an hour, a little bit over. So thank you all again for speakers and everyone that's on this call for such an information-packed session, because I feel like we can continue. I'll hold this open for like 10 more minutes if people have time and they still want to just chat, because I know that we are just scratching the surface, and there seems to be like a lot more deep dives we can go in. But I'll be sharing this recording once we close it next Wednesday. I'm going off on a mini vacation tomorrow, so I won't have time till then. But you'll definitely get the recordings as well as the chat, and I'll work a little bit more on the notes because there was a lot to take in at that time. So again, thank you, and I'll keep this open for any other lingering conversations you guys want to have.
Are you able to copy the chat notes and share those as well?
Yep, I'll be copying that as well.
Thanks so much.
Quick question for y'all. I'm curious, for the development process, do you have a development checklist saying, okay, this is what step A, B, C, D, all the way to Z, essentially? Do you have something like that you could share?
We do not.
Okay.
I think that's what we're going to.
I was going to recommend that earlier. The National Cooperative Bank has a what's it called, like a cooperative development playbook or something. It's a pretty good.
I don't know if the bank made it, or I think it might have been that Minnesota group.
It's a good introduction to the process.
Oscar, if you want to take down
Oh,
my
yeah.
email. I can send it to you.
I got this one already. I was been reading it. So
Okay.
thank you. But I could send you I do have questions about the process though. Because right now we're debating if we should develop it ourselves essentially, or work with another partner to develop it, or work with another person to do a property management process. And so we're kind of looking at all of our options and then taking it back to our collective and voting and seeing what options does everybody want to do. That's essentially what we're doing right now. But I'm sure, once I debrief with Matt, who is also like another co-creator for this project here where I'm at, once we have a deeper conversation and have more questions, I'd love to shoot them over to y'all.
Yeah, I mean, we would be happy to chat and talk more thoroughly. Also,
Sweet.
just like there's a lot of conversations to have. Like one could just be verbally talking about the development process and maybe things to think about and like what that would entail if you were doing it yourself. And I think the thing to remember too is that you can co-develop a project and have various roles, and that like there's a lot of roles that happen in a development project, and you don't have to do 100% or 0%. It can and should be a blend, because I would say not being involved would just be a waste, because I think this is very useful. So I would strongly recommend that you be involved in the development process.
Yeah, that was our intentions, is to actually have community folks involved in the process. We just don't know. We've been talking to the county because we're working with the county on a pilot project, and we're working on this project with them. They just haven't got back to us to what extent, or do they see us participating? But at the same time, we also have to tell them like, okay, this is the process. We know that this is the process of development. And this is where we see ourselves being plugged into the process. And so understanding better of the components that are required in a development process would actually help us figure out, okay, this is where we should be. This is something they could handle and delegate in that aspect.
And Oscar, I thought you're also working with Community Vision, in which they're kind of creating like introductory slide deck for the developers that you'll be sharing with your board.
Yes, we are. We are working with Community Vision, and they are talking to like they're going to come and talk to us like a real estate 101 course. We don't have a pinpointed date, but I can send y'all that information too, so you have it. But they're also giving us like a smorgasbord, and then, okay, like what do you want from here at that point? And that's something that, having better ideas of how to do this would give us a better direction to make sure that the best interest of the community is served through that whole process. But I appreciate y'all coming. It's been a really enlightening conversation.
Oscar, just also so you're aware, we are working with a lot of different groups around Washington, and now we're slowly starting to come into California to play more of a co-development role, but in different degrees depending on what the group needs and has. So we have to kind of talk through what that could look like with y'all if you're interested.
Yeah, that'd be great. I love what y'all are doing, really, just because it's more focused on the preservation, and that's what our community wants to do. Because we don't want to do new developments, because displacement, environmental impacts, all those factors play a role. And so how do we empower community to stay where they're living at, but also improve the conditions they're living in, because a lot of the places haven't been invested in because they just saw it as a rental property. And so, yeah, I would love to continue the conversation and seeing how we can support y'all and you can support us through this process, because I do love what y'all are doing.
Thanks. Likewise.
Very much likewise.
So late breaking question, guys, do we need like a West Coast cooperative housing developers Slack channel so that we can all
That'd be a good idea.
stay in touch?
Serena, would we be able to host that?
I don't see why not, but yeah, I think that'd be cool.
I think it's a great idea.
Because we can just fold it into our initiative group, because I have a feeling it's slightly expanding.
Yeah,
in a sense.
I'm seeing a lot of touch points for co-op in some of our other initiatives. And so
Mhm.
definitely would love to connect with folks already in this space and how some of the other work is connecting with what we're doing here at Big.
Cool.
Great. And I also want to give you all an invite. So in June 2nd and 3rd, we're actually having a co-op conference here in San Jose. And so the CCCD, the California Center for Cooperative Development, is actually hosting their California Co-op Summit here in San Jose. And so if you all are free and have the chance, come by, we can definitely show you around the area, the neighborhoods that we're working in. And I can send that information. Say that again.
What are the dates again?
June 2nd and 3rd. And I can email y'all the invitation stuff that we have. And diagram, I mean the essentially the agenda for that.
That sounds great.
And then Josh and Tamara, I know it's like we're just like letting you with questions and invites, but I know there's still like a lot of questions that are lingering from I think our side and as well as yours. And I know we have the monthly meetings, but does that work for your calendars? Like, are there any like one or two of the meetings that kind of fall within your calendar? Because I'm just thinking it's like we can just take up half the meeting for just like questions back and forth between each other, especially on the development side, because that's like some of the things I'm hearing. It's just like we just need more time to just dive into this.
I don't have any thought that the time doesn't work for us. I think you just had one this week. So is it like the beginning of the month?
Yeah, I think if we knew like during half of it, you would really like us to join, that would be helpful.
Okay.
So we can reduce the amount of time where we set aside for it. And then at least one of us could join for that. If that makes sense with the flow of things.
I think it makes sense. I'm looking at Garland, Oscar, since you are the remaining members so far from the group. How did that sound for you both?
Yeah, that works. I think that's a good idea. I'm sure there's other questions. It's just a rabbit hole at that point. We just other stuff.
Which is why
comes
I'm
up,
giving
like,
you a
okay.
time limit. That's why I'm giving you guys a time limit.
That's good. That's what we need.
I'll say, I mean, just separately, I am going to California for work. And so I'd be happy to come down to San Jose and also just meet in person. We can have like a real long conversation with less of a time cap, but some time cap.
Yeah, that'd be great, actually. If Jenny, if you can connect us over email, and then we can arrange something for you to see the area, what we're working at, and then also understand a little bit more of what we're working on here in the area.
And what is the like kind of time frame of your process right now?
Right now it's open-ended. We're expecting it to take like 5 years, to be honest.
Okay.
It's because it's a brand new development from the ground up, and we're trying to figure out all the pieces. And I'd say the biggest hurdle is just making sure that our folks are informed correctly, and then being able to make a decision after that.
So you're not rushing against a timeline. Once you feel like you have the appropriate knowledge, then you'll move on to the next phase.
Essentially, we're taking our time with this, is what everybody is the pulse for everybody. Especially right now, we're waiting for the property owner to sign essentially the letter of intent. And that's where that essentially is going to turn on the on switch with the county and other motions in the back end, because we're also working with Destination Home on this project. And then we're also working with South Bay CLT in the area. And so we're trying to piece all these pieces together correctly and make the decisions correctly. And that's why we're not in a huge rush, but we do see it picking up by, let's say, October of this year.
Great. Okay. Yeah, it was a handful of weeks ago, or maybe months ago. Time is wild. I was meeting with people. Right. We were chatting, and she was starting to share the work that you were doing. And
sweet.
Yeah, so I would love to learn more.
Yeah, let me put our website link on the chat. And from there, Jenny, if you can connect us, and then
I'll connect you for the date. And then I was just curious, like when are you guys planning to come to California? Because we can also like arrange for other co-op members to kind of, if you don't mind, like us tagging along, just listening into your conversation as well.
Sure thing.
Yeah, we can do multiple things as well. So I'm trying to start to get into the habit of coming down more, just as we start to get more work and trying to meet more organizations. So I think let's be in touch. I'm also going on vacation next week. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be a slow beat time. Sounds great. So thank you guys all. You guys have a good lunch. I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time, but it was just a really wonderful conversation. So thank you.
Well, thanks, y'all. Safe travels.
cool.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Hi.
Bye.